How many times have you said this to yourself? I'll rest when this is finished. The problem is, the finish line keeps moving. One more task, one more email, one more thing to sort out. And somehow, rest never quite arrives. Not because you don't value recovery, not because you're bad at switching off, but because something inside the system has learned that forward movement matters more than restoration. And that's what this video is about. Because this isn't about time management, it isn't about scheduling more recovery, or taking more holidays, or setting better boundaries around work. Those things help at the surface, but they don't reach the pattern underneath. Because the pattern isn't about how much time is allocated to rest. It's about what the system does with that time. And for a lot of high functioning people, the system doesn't actually restore during rest. It just stops. And stopping is not the same thing. In the last video, we looked at what high functioning burnout actually looks like. How it doesn't announce itself, how it accumulates beneath the surface of continued performance. This video goes one layer deeper into the specific mechanism that produces it. Because burnout of this kind isn't caused by too much work. It is caused by a system that has lost the ability to genuinely restore. And there's a very specific reason that happens. One that has nothing to do with weakness or lack of discipline, and has everything to do with what drive actually does to the system. That's the distinction this video is built around. Because drive and restoration aren't naturally opposed. A system that can drive hard and restore fully is a sustainable system. The problem begins when one of those becomes so dominant that the other can no longer operate. And that is what happens in high functioning people over time. Drive becomes the default orientation of the system. Forward, active, anticipatory, action ready. And restoration, which requires a system to release those processes entirely, starts to lose ground. Not dramatically, gradually, in small moments, each one barely noticeable, until the system has effectively forgotten how to give restoration equal weight. And this is where it becomes important to understand what's actually happening. Because there is a specific moment where drive overrides restoration. And it's not a big moment, it's small, almost invisible. In the moments when the system receives a signal to pause, to slow down, to disengage, to rest. And instead of following that signal, it immediately generates a reason to keep going. One more thing to finish. One more problem to solve. One more task that feels just urgent enough to justify not stopping yet. And that replacement happens fast. So fast that it doesn't feel like a choice. It feels like necessity. Like the work genuinely requires it. Like rest can't wait until this is done. And this is where the phrase appears. The one most high-performing people will recognize immediately. I'll rest when this is finished. And the problem with that phrase isn't the intention behind it. The problem is that the finish line keeps moving. Not because of poor planning, but because the system that generates the next task is the same system that overrides the signal to rest. And it will keep generating the next task for as long as it remains the dominant orientation. Which means the rest never quite arrives. Or when it does, the system doesn't know what to do with it. This is not a discipline problem. It's a system pattern. You might recognize this as a very specific kind of discomfort. The discomfort of doing nothing. Not boredom. Something more like an inability to be still without stillness feeling wrong. Like something is being left undone. Like you should be somewhere else. Like the rest itself is a form of falling behind. You might also notice it as guilt. A quiet but persistent sense that rest needs to be earned. That you haven't quite done enough yet to justify stopping. And so when rest arrives, it doesn't feel like relief. It feels like a mild version of wrong. And then there's the most important revealing marker of all. The relief when you're busy again. When the purpose returns. When the system has something to move back towards. And there's a genuine sense of settling. Of the system returning to familiar ground. And that relief is the cleanest signal of where the system is. Because a system in balance doesn't feel relieved by busyness. It moves between drive and restoration fluidly. And when the return to busyness feels like coming home, that's the system telling you that restoration has lost its footing entirely. You might also notice it in places rest is supposed to happen. Evenings that drift back toward work. Not from necessity, from pulling. Holidays where the system doesn't disengage. Where the body stops but the mind continues. When you return, no more restored than when you left. Because stopping and restoring are not the same thing. And a system orientated towards drive can stop, but it can't restore until drive releases its hold on the orientation. Drive keeps the system moving forward. Restoration requires a system to fully release forward movement. Drive generates the next task. Restoration requires there to be no next task, even temporarily. Drive is orientated towards what's coming. Restoration only happens in what's here. Drive is productive in the presence of discomfort. Restoration requires the discomfort of non-doing to be tolerated. And when drive is the dominant orientation, every signal to restore gets overridden by a signal to keep going. Not because the person is broken, because the system is doing exactly what it learned to do. And what it learned was that forward movement is safe and stillness is not. And that unlearning is not a discipline practice. It's a regulation one. The next time rest is available, notice what the system does with it. Not what you do with it. What the system does. Notice whether a reason to keep going appears. How quickly it arrives. How convincing it feels. And notice whether the rest feels like relief. Or whether it feels like something slightly wrong. Don't try to change it. Just observe it. Because the first step isn't forcing restoration. It's seeing clearly what the system is currently doing in the moment when restoration is available. And if the guilt appears, notice that too. Not as a moral signal, as a system signal. The system flagging that stillness feels unsafe. And when the relief of busyness returns, notice that. Without judgment. Just as information. The system returning to what it knows. Because seeing the pattern clearly is what makes it possible for something to shift. Not through forcing rest, through the system gradually learning that stillness is safe, and that restoration is not the opposite of drive. It's what makes drive sustainable. Because this reframes what restoration actually is. It isn't the absence of drive. It isn't slowing down permanently. It isn't compromise on performance or output or ambition. It's the counterpart that makes all those things possible over time. A system that can drive and restore is more capable than a system that can only drive. Not because rest produces output, but because a system that genuinely restores returns to drive with full capacity. Not depleted, not running on a reduced baseline, not performing on momentum while the actual resources erode beneath it. And over time, as the system learns that stillness is safe, the guilt during rest starts to reduce. The pull toward the next task loosens slightly. The finish line stops moving quite so reliably. Not because drive is reduced, because restoration has been given back its power. And a system that can do both is the only system that sustains. So, if rest never quite feels like enough, if the finish line keeps moving, if doing nothing feels vaguely wrong, and busy feels like coming home, this is why. Not because you work too hard, not because you lack discipline around rest, but because the system learned that forward movement is safe and stillness is not. And until restoration gets the power back, that pattern will continue, regardless of how much you understand it. If this is something you want to work through directly, rather than understand it at a distance, there is a link in the description where you can find out more. No pressure, just there if the timing is right. So, if you recognize yourself in this pattern, it is worth continuing through the series, because each video builds on the last. In the next video, we look at something specific, because the question that usually follows this one is, if drive is this dominant, how do I reduce it without losing the edge that came with it? That's what the next video is about. Downshifting without losing what matters.